Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to the Fertile Blades, a place where poets gather to share their hearts and minds. Peace and harmony and the end to the war and hatred can only happen when we know each other. So, in this segment, we are the earth and we are the people. Uh, it's our endeavor to know of the people and the philosophies, stories, thoughts, culture across the culture, the spread across continents. We had a segment called Poets Talk About Poets, which we highlighted on the poets that are based in India. In this segment, we are the world and we are the people, which happens to be a tagline, but its original title be Poets Speak of Poets. It tries to bring our world poets together to talk of legendary poets from their country or from elsewhere. The main purpose or objective of this program is to bring the world closer and erase all the borders through literature and the art of, conveying the expression. It's our immense pleasure that we had esteemed four participants as speakers who happens to be our regular open mic participants, but today they have specially here for us to introduce folk poets they like most. We had the honor of having Henry L. Jones, who would be talking about Langston heroes. So far, he hasn't joined, but then he is one of the panel member. And second would be Martina Roberts Galegoes, would be talking about Amado Nervo. And third would be Dustin Pickering, who's having a parrot TV and will be introducing in a while. We'll be talking about Bob Dylan. Cheryl Jackson will be talking about Lucille Clifton. So anyway, we'll be beginning this program by introduction of each of our panel members. But before that, I also had the honor of having our what do you call our mentor of Fertile Brands is a core mentor. We had these anthologies together, bringing this several poets of the world across. So she's a professor of Delhi University, Sri Venkateswara College, Dr. Rupali Sarkar Gaur, who would be acting as a co-host to this show. Before proceeding further to the program, I would ask Dr. Rupali Sarkar Gaur to say a few words about this program and how to this going. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Namaste and good evening, dear poets who are our friends too. This is a very special program today, and because Fertile Brains has been celebrating its 5th year, and Prasanna, who is here, your host, your main host, he has been trying to bring the world together, and through literature and through poetry and the pandemic taught us that we're all human beings, that we're all vulnerable, that we're all can be hit by the same. And I think if anything, I mean, the pandemic has taken away people from us, but it has also brought us together in a very strange way. And through literature and poetry, we have expressed ourselves. We've kept our mental health good. You know, when we've been sorrowing, we have reached out to each other. We've reached out to words. And so today, we are the people, we're the world. We have taken these lines from a wonderfully known song. And but it fits in that we will today listen to you and listen to and hear about writers and poets that we are familiar with and not familiar with. And thank you so much, Prasanna, for inviting me to be part of this wonderful show. So, who do we begin with today?
Okay, let us begin with our first speaker. The order goes like this. So first would be Henry, and second would be
So,
Martina.
Henry's here.
Yeah, third would be Dustin, and fourth would be Cheyrl. Yes, Henry is here. So Henry L. Jones will be talking about the Langston Hughes. Before that, I would like to introduce him, and I would with a short bio of his. Henry L. Jones is an award-winning poet and artist, first poet laureate of Hendersonville, Tennessee, the Poets Writers Collective, Art Wire Fellow, National Black Poet Laureate Society's President, Academy of American Poets, listed poet, and others. He is published internationally. Some books include Run into Blackness, Feeling My Poetic Gumbo, and Black Skillet Blues, Poetry Without Cornbread. So let us invite Henry L. Jones and get
Good
to know
morning.
about Langston Hughes. Over to
Thank you.
Henry. Welcome, Henry. You got 15 minutes to talk about, and I'll be reminding the time that's left in the chat so that you could, pass on to the next point. So please kindly check your chat section too. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. It is 10:30, a little after 10:30 now, and had a few hiccups in technology, but I'm here. And my author is Langston Hughes. Some of you may not have heard of him. He was basically the literary lead of what was the Harlem Renaissance in the United States. And the Harlem Renaissance, there's still remnants of that because many of the authors, artists, singers, dancers, they set a foundation of classics. And we're talking about artists from the African American community. And the Harlem Renaissance was a period of African American artistic and cultural activity right after, between the First World War and the Great Depression. And there was a time where before that, you didn't really hear a lot about Black creatives, people expressing the time and all. It was there, but the Harlem Renaissance was a time that was an era in which so many Black creatives came out. And within the literary world, there was Langston Hughes and numerous others. They met, they hung out, they shared different books, publications, journals, and so forth were created, and people just had a ball. So today, I'm sharing with you some of the words of Langston Hughes. He was considered one of the leaders because setting up similar to what we have today, our wonderful leader, bringing people together via literature. One of his most popular poems is the poem, because it still is, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. And he wrote this for Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a scholar, a poet himself, and it was between Langston and Du Bois, but Langston wrote more. And Du Bois, you've heard of the NAACP. He was one of the founders of the NAACP. Du Bois fought with human rights. What was particularly a common theme in the Harlem Renaissance was that the cultural past of Black people was integrated within the poetry and other forms of expression, as well as what is going on or what was going on in terms of social issues and injustices. So this, I believe, is why his poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, is considered his best poem in terms of getting a good introduction of Langston. So here it goes. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like those rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut nearest the Congo, and it lured me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom torn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. That's all I know, rivers. And as you see, he brought in this wealth of knowledge about the past and how they connect to today. And that's something that in the African American community, we're still rebuilding and reconnecting so much. The next poem is titled Dinner Guests, Me. I know I am the Negro problem, being wined and dined, answering the usual questions that come to white mind, which seeks demurely to probe in a polite way, the why and the where withal of darkness, USA, wondering how things got this way in current democratic night, murmuring gently over phrases of Du Bois. I'm so ashamed of being white. The lobster is delicious, the wine divine, the center of attention at the damask table mine. To be a problem on Park Avenue at 8 is not so bad. Solutions to the problems, of course, wait. When I think of Langston, I think of protest. I think of a writer, a poet, using expression to uplift as well as educate and inspire the reader, the listener, to understand what was going on. So this is a good indication of the climate of the Harlem Renaissance. And here's another one, which is, I'm in Nashville, and this is something is going on now. This next poem that he wrote is titled Ku Klux, referring to the Ku Klux Klan. They took me out to some lonesome place. They said, do you believe in the great white race? I said, mister, to tell you the truth, I'd believe in anything if you just turn me loose. The white man said, boy, can it be you're standing there and asking me? They hit me in the head and knocked me down, and then they kicked me onto the ground. A Klansman said, nigger, look me in the face and tell me you believe in the great white race. Now, we're talking about a period of the Harlem Renaissance way before the 60s, when we had the Black Arts Movement. Remember, during World War I and the Depression, and people were trying to connect culturally. And many people don't realize that the Ku Klux Klan was formed shortly after we were freed in 1863. We just had Juneteenth. And there was some resentment prior to that, but in terms of an organization, it was formed in 1863. Well, we can swing it to 5. So for those many years, so from 1863, the lynchings, the violence, and interaction of the clans, kids, communities up into culminating to this type of poem and that type of attitude. And we've been having marches here in Nashville and surrounding areas. Let me tell you, it's frightening. It really is. And that may be, as poets, why we are still connecting with literature, using literature to bring people to life. All right, the next poem, which is one of my favorites. I have these books of Black poets and different time periods that I purchased mainly when I was in college, but I continue to buy books. And my kids stole some of them. So when I was preparing, I was like, where's this book? Where's that book? Because books are very precious to me. I love to buy them and of course read them. All right. This next poem here. Let's go with this one. Yes, it's a good one. Un-American investigators. Now today, we see the body cameras and things like that in terms of acquiring evidence of injustice and so forth. But finding evidence for injustices, racial attacks, and so forth is still an ongoing process. But remember, this is right after World War I. We're talking about what, late 30s and 40s and so forth on that period. So Langston's poem, Un-American Investigator. The committee's fat, smug, almost secure, co-religionists shiver with delight in warm manure as they investigated. Too brave to name a name, have a pseudonym revealed and gentle game of who, born Jew, is who. Is not your name Lipschitz? Yes. Did you not change it for subservient purpose? No. For nefarious gain? No. So, are you sure? The committee shivers. What delight in its manure. Third degree. Hit me, jab me, make me say I did it. Blood on my sport shirt and my tan suede shoes. Face like jack-o'-lanterns is gray slouch hats. Slug me, beat me, screams jump out like blowtorch, 3 kicks behind the legs that kill the kids I'd make tomorrow. Bars and floor skyrocket and burst like Roman candles. When you throw cold water onto me, I'll sign the paper. I looked and saw the man they call the law. He was coming down the street at me. Excuse me. I had visions in my head of being laid out cold and dead, or else murdered by the 3rd degree. I said, oh Lord, if you can, save me from this man. Don't let him make a pope out of me. But the Lord, he was not quick. The law raised up his stick and beat the living hell out of me. Now I do not understand why God don't protect a man from police brutality, being poor and Black. I've no weapons to strike back. So who but the Lord can protect me? We'll see. And this last one, that poem, of course, the incidents described there is similar things we have going on today still, unfortunately, to Black people and many people. This last poem, still here. I've been scared and battered. My hopes the wind done scattered. Sorrow has fritzed me, sun has baked me. Looks like between them, they done tried to make me stop laughing, stop loving, stop living. But I don't care. I'm still here. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the Bard, Langston Hughes.
You bring out the true essence of this program, and that was a great beginning, I would say. Arpani ma'am.
Well, thank you so much, Henry. I have a very special connection with Hugh Langston Hugh because I read a couple of poems at Busboy and Poets in Washington, D.C. that I'd gone for a lecture to the Department of Sociology in the whole university. And they have the restaurant outside, and they have a place where you can read poetry. And and also, I mean, he's such an inspiring poet, and how he broke out of the conventional writing forms and used jazz and other things. I just wanted to read a few lines which would fit in with our program today, which is from the great poet that you've just spoken about. What is poetry? He answered. It is the human soul entire, squeezed like a lemon or a lime, drop by drop into atomic words. A poet is a human being. Each human being must live within his time, with and for his people, and within the boundaries of his country. So we thank you so much for the introduction to such a great poet. And we move on to the next poet now. Who is it now?
Martina Galegoes. Thank you, Henry. That was really remarkable. Great presentation. Thanks. Thanks for the.
So we have Martina with us. I'll read out her bio. Martina was born and raised in Mexico. She got a master's degree from GCU after a massive near-fatal hemorrhagic stroke. One of her first poems was a semi-finalist in a national amateur poetry competition. Her works have appeared in the Altadena anthology poetry review, Basta, Poets Responding, Spirit, Fire Review, Poetry Super Highway, Silver Birch Press, Open Door Magazine, The Bloom, WFWP, Poetry Festival Canada, the 3Q Anthology, Highland Park Poetry, I think it's the LA Magazine, Who's Who in America, and more recently, the award-winning anthology When the Virus Came Calling, COVID-19 Strikes America. She'd been published by Golden Foothill Press, edited by Thelma Reyna. And we have her today with us to speak on this great poet, a Mexican poet, Amado Nervo, and who's a journalist, an ambassador, an educator, and she'll tell us more about him. Thank you so much, Martina, for being with us. We welcome you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm not used to wearing these things, so. And I have a cough. Hopefully, I can get through this. And like I said, that's why I need to keep it very short. And so, by the way, Langston Hughes was one of the first poets I learned about when I first arrived in this country. And I learned that from my high school teacher, so that was kind of cool. Because, yeah, my Amado Nervo seems to be like a family favorite. He's also one of my brother's favorite. And my brother is very good at reciting poetry. It's like, wow, I wish I could do that, but nah. Okay, so, yeah, Amado Nervo was also known as Crisostomo Ruiz de Nervo. And he was one of Mexico's most famous and influential poets. He was born August 27, 1870 in the city of Tepic, state of Nayarit, Mexico. And besides being a poet, like he said, he was a journalist, diplomat, ambassador, and educator. He was also considered the most distinguished Mexican poet of the 19th and early 20th centuries, and was also a Mexican poet and novelist of the Spanish modernism movement. And this movement sought to encounter materialistic and naturalistic literary influences expressing a mystic spiritual approach to reality. Nervo had actually studied for the priesthood, but took a clerical job because of financial reasons. He later became or worked widely and internationally as a journalist, but in his final years, he worked as an academic and ambassador. The death of his wife, whom he met in Paris and spent more than a decade with, and died in 1912, influenced some of his most significant works. Nervo's poetry is lyric, deep, intricate, and movingly simple. Sounds like a contradiction there. He was largely a formal poet working in a particularly lyrical language. His words are often precise and rich, charged with the various senses. My cat's calling. In ways that are difficult to translate, and inevitably some aspects remain buried. His poetry was known for its use of metaphor and reference to mysticism. His poetry was presented both love and religion as well as Christianity and Hinduism. Amado Nervo died from uremia at the age of 48. Well, on May 24th, 1929. There's something not okay with that. In Montevideo, Uruguay. Uremia is a raised level in the blood of urea and other nitrogenous waste compounds that are normally eliminated by the kidneys. So it sounds like kidney failure. One of his most famous poems is Vida, Nada te debo, or Life, I owe you nothing. His wife's name was Ana Cecilia Luisa de Delia, who lived with the mother from 1901 to 1912. So I'll read one of his most famous poems in both English and Spanish, which is At Peace or En Paz, Spanish. En paz. Muy cerca de mi ocaso, yo te bendigo, vida, porque nunca me diste ni esperanza fallida, ni trabajos injustos, ni pena inmerecida, porque veo que al final de mi camino duro, yo fui el arquitecto de mi propio destino, que si extraje las hieles o la miel de las cosas, fue porque en ellas puse hiel o mieles sabrosas. Cuando planté rosales, coseché siempre rosas. Cierto, a mis lozanías va a seguir el invierno, mas tú no me dijiste que mayo fuese eterno. Ayer sin dudas, largas las noches de mis penas, mas no me prometiste tan solo noches buenas. Y en cambio, tuve algunas santamente serenas. Amé, fui amado, el sol acarició mi faz. Vida, nada me debes. Vida, estamos en paz. Nice and short. English. At peace. With my sunset now near, I bless you, O life, because you never gave me false hope or unjust tasks, nor unmerited grief. Because at the end of my rough road I see that I was the architect of my own destiny, that if I extracted honey or bile from things, it was because I placed in them either bitterness or savory sweetness. When I planted rose bushes, I always gathered roses. After my budding youth, winter would surely follow. But you, O life, never told me May would be eternal. I encountered, without doubt, long nights of grief, but you never promised me only good nights. Nonetheless, through dark hours I have slept peacefully and in God's grace. I loved and was loved. The sun caressed my face. O life, you owe me nothing. O life, death settled. We are at peace. And now I'll read a a couple of excerpts from an anthology about modernism poetry, but in Spanish. I don't have it in English. Okay. O al fijo en papiro, la fiel del vampiro, despliega en la sombra vocablo que asombra. ¿Quién le escribiría con burla macabra aquella palabra de melancolía? Es débil gemido que anuncia el olvido o símbolo oscuro que sufre el futuro. Es oculta clave de amor humano o el ay de un gusano que quiso ser ave o vagos matices de lánguidos grises que ahuyentan la calma si invaden el alma, o dolor sincero de la fantasía, o melancolía de Alberto Durero, cuadro que despiertas las visiones muertas que forjó el anhelo para mi consuelo, simbólica mano con líneas febriles, trazó con perfiles al género humano. And this is from Amado himself. It's called La Bella Durmiente del Bosque, which translates to Sleeping Beauty of the Forest. Decidme, noble anciana, por vuestra vida, ¿yace aquí la princesa que está dormida? Esperando a 2 siglos un caballero, la princesa, la princesa de que hablas es tu conseja, soy yo, pero no miras, estoy muy vieja, ya ninguno me busca y a nadie espero, y yo que la procela de un mar de llanto, zarqué, yo que he salvado montes y ríos por vos, ay caballero, qué desencanto, mas en balde por verme sufriste tanto, tus cabellos son blancos como los míos. Asómate al espejo de esta fontana, oh pobre caballero, tarde viniste, mas aún puedo amarte como una hermana, posar en mi regazo tu frente cana y entonar viejas y coplas cuando estés triste. And I'm afraid I have to stop there because my cough is picking up.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you for introducing. I mean, talking about and seeing about the Amado Nervo and his contribution to the society and in general. Is a Spanish poet, Rupali ma'am.
Yes, thank you so much, Martina, because, we listened to you reading the poems in the language in which it was written, and therefore, we heard the language, its beauty, and then you translated and you told us, more about it. We thank you so much for being here with us, and we hope that you will join us again and tell us more.
Thank you for inviting.
And I'm also very interested, because you said that he was a mystic poet, he used to write on mysticism and religion, and he was interested in Hinduism also, which is very interesting to us, and I hope next time we'll read more about him. You've introduced us to a very profound poet. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Thank you, Martina. Get well soon. And our next the member will be talking about Bob Dylan. Let me take the honor of introducing him. Dustin Pickering is his name, and he's the founder of Transcendent Zero Press. He has contributed writing to Huffington Post, Los Angeles Review, The Statesman's India, a Journal of Liberty and International Affairs, the Colorado Review, World Literature Today, and several other publications. He is the author of numerous poetry collections and books, including Salt and Sorrow. He placed in top 100 for the Arabic Prize in 2021 and 2023 and was a finalist in Adelaide Literary Journal's first short fiction contest. He was longlisted for the Rahim Karim World Prize in 2022 and given the honor of Knight of World Peace by the World Institute for the Peace that same year. He hosts the popular interview series World Inkers Network on YouTube and co-founded World Inkers Printing and Publishing. That was about Dustin Pickering, who will be talking about Bob Dylan. Over to you, Dylan. Dustin, thank you.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm really enjoying hearing the other poets speak of poets. I want to hold my edition of Tarantula from Bob Dylan up here. And there's a rumor that his name came from Dylan Thomas, which is partially true from what I've heard and read. He actually wanted to change his name because he said some people were born with the wrong parents. And he found the name Dylan interesting, and he ran into the poet Dylan Thomas, and he kind of invigorated with his work, and so he went with that spelling, but he'd already decided to change his name to Bob Dylan. So I'm going to go ahead and present my presentation. Among the multitude of American poets, there is an anomaly. He was born Robert Allen Zimmerman in 1941 and developed the stage name Bob Dylan. Considered one of America's leading musicians, he stirred controversy after going electric on July 25th, 1963 at Newport Folk Festival. Of the event, he later said he acted defiantly because he felt the folk community was too possessive of him. And his defiance, he opened path for future rock and roll groups to stir controversy. Around the same year, he was composing Tarantula, a book I came to know in 1997 as a teenager. The book was written through the years 1964 and 1965 and was published in 1971. This collection is Stream of Consciousness, a style popularized by novelists such as Marcel Proust, Virginia Woolf, and James Joyce. Alexander Bain in 1855 coined the term, defining it by, quote unquote, the concurrence of sensations in one common stream of consciousness on the same cerebral highway enables those of different senses to be associated as readily as the sensations of the same sense, end quote. Spin Magazine, in an article called Top 5 Unintelligible Sentences Written by Rock Stars, quotes from Tarantula. Now is not the time to act silly, to wear your big boots and jump on the garbage clowns. This cleverly uninhibited sentence gives you an idea of what the collection depicts. Many of the poems are written like letters to imagined characters. Certain lines are resonant. You walk on white snow where a nosebleed would disturb the universe. Son of the vampire with his arm around Betsy Ross. Standing on a bullet-holed Volkswagen, a bearded leprechaun, and he's wearing a topless mafia cape, holding up some burning green stamps, etc. You get the idea. The beauty of these words is to the flow that comes with them and the creative impulse enlivened by that flow. 2016, Dylan was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in a controversial move from the Swedish Academy. One factor for the award is likely Christopher Rick's book, Dylan's Vision of Sin, in which he considers Dylan's song lyrics in light of their literary content. Rick says in an interview with the Dylan Review, quote, popular art has a particular temptation to make out that it's not intellectual or cerebral. It comes as naturally as the leaves to a tree, end quote. Then he paraphrases Dylan himself, suggesting that an artist must program his or her brain to make sure it doesn't get in the way. The poem is a cooperation between things you can reason about and things you can't reason about, things which will remain mysterious, end quote, Rick says. Throughout the years of writing Tarantula, Dylan experimented. It must have been an exciting way to train his mind to naturally compose powerful poetry. The years were turbulent. Dylan's favorite poets include the French surrealist Rimbaud, known for his contributions leading to modernism. His work as Season in Hell is often considered an influence on Tarantula. Dylan heavily influenced the Beat Generation writers such as Burroughs, Ginsberg, and Kerouac, and they influenced him. Ginsberg recounts first hearing Dylan's music. Quote, "It seems a torch had been passed to another generation from earlier bohemian or beat illumination." End quote. Ginsberg, during these same reflections, describes poetry as subjective truth that has an objective reality because someone has realized it. The Portable Beat Reader includes a few of Dylan's poems. In 2016, he sort of snubbed the Swedish Academy by sending Patti Smith to speak on his behalf at the banquet with his comment that, quote unquote, pre-existing commitments prevented him from attending. Dylan said, quote, "But like Shakespeare, I too am often occupied with the pursuit of my creative endeavors and dealing with all aspects of life's mundane matters." End quote. The Academy response states, "Several laureates have, for various reasons, been unable to come to Stockholm to receive the prize, among them Doris Lessing, Harold Pinter, and Elfriede Jelinek. The prize still belongs to them just as it belongs to Bob Dylan." Was Dylan offering some kind of political statement in sending Patti Smith? Perhaps, but he was indeed on tour at the time. In his Nobel address, Dylan speaks as having an informed view of the world. He credits books such as Don Quixote and Ivanhoe for giving him a quote-unquote understanding of human nature he brings to his songs. Many of Dylan's popular folk lyrics are structured as literature, such as "A Hard Rain's a Gonna Fall." The song's uses call and response in the manner of the Anglo-Scottish ballad Lord Randall, written anonymously. The ballad appears in English form in Sir Walter Scott's Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border in 1803, but it is said to originate from Italy in 1629. Literary heritage is important to Bob Dylan as much as it is to any other literary icon. While the controversial move by the Academy prompted criticism in high places, it also enabled common poets, such as me, to reflect on the nature of the craft. In high school, age 17, I first purchased Tarantula from a local bookstore. I was immediately in awe because I could not make sense of the writing. I liked obscurity. Gradually, I found other poets such as E. Cummings, Leonard Cohen, and Sylvia Plath, but Dylan was accessible because of the music. During his Nobel lecture, Dylan notes three important books: Moby Dick, All's Quiet on the Western Front, and The Odyssey. One of my favorite songs of Dylan's makes use of the Moby Dick symbolism heavily, Bob Dylan's 115th Dream. This song also explores the mythical consciousness and confusion of the United States. The song serves a commentary on Moby Dick's key themes, yet its surreal comedy entrenches the parable within contemporary imaginations. The song ultimately ridicules reactionary minds that claim U.S. history as their own, yet oppose American ideals in practice. He writes, for instance, "I walked by a Guernsey cow who directed me down to the Bowery slums, where people carried signs around saying, 'Ban the bums.' I jumped right in line saying, 'I hope I'm not too late,' when I realized I hadn't eaten for 5 days straight." Making the statement personal, he positions himself in the middle of developing history. He also shines a light with this dark humor, illuminating conformist hypocrisy. This is the genius of Bob Dylan. He is certainly deserving of the Nobel. Music journalist Everett True said of the Nobel Award was safe and the prize only reflects, quote unquote, everything about the age, ethnicity, and gender of the Nobel Prize for Literature judges. But Dylan was never a stranger to controversy. He has skirted religions over the years, earning criticism for drifting. Upon converting to Christianity in the late 1970s, he said, quote, "The glory of the Lord knocked me down and picked me up," end quote. He recorded several gospel albums, but in 1983, he returned to Judaism and has even visited Israel. In Tempest from 2012, Dylan writes, "They waited at the landing and they tried to understand, but there is no understanding for the judgment of God's hand." suggesting his roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition have not faltered. He spoke before the writing of this album that he intended to write religious songs. On his YouTube station version of Murder Most Foul, a 2020 song focused on the 1960s, particular JFK and MLK assassinations, Dylan writes, quote, "Greetings to my fans and followers with gratitude for all your support and loyalty across the years. This is an unreleased song we recorded a while back that you might find interesting. Stay safe, stay observant, and may God be with you." Dylan was in a motorcycle accident in 1966. After releasing 5 albums and being on tour constantly, he wrote of the accident in 2004 that he had recovered, although he'd been hurt. He further states in Chronicles that he wanted to be out of the rat race, and his accident served that purpose. There was no police report and no hospital record of the accident, and only a few close associates know the details. He later said that he, quote, had very little in common with and knew even less about a generation that I was supposed to be the voice of, end quote. He was constantly trying to buck his audience from its expectations to declare his autonomy as an individual artist. However, these attempts only solidified his angelic protests. There are many reasons to appreciate Bob Dylan. His lyrical poetry tells us that art cannot be divorced from history or cultural roots. His masterful touch is his own, but his works belong to the community of listeners and readers. In spite of the fact he avoided the label voice of a generation, his master's touch could not be relinquished. To this day, his influence remains steadfast. At age 79, Dylan sold his entire song catalog for over $300 million to Universal Music Group. The chief executive of Universal said of Dylan that he is, quote, one of the very greatest practitioners of that art, referring to songwriting. In 2012, President Obama awarded Dylan the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest honor for American civilians who contributed to U.S. national interests. The president said that Dylan changed, quote, not just what music sounded like, but the message it carried and how it made people feel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin. That was, stream of consciousness, Bob Dylan, the Parliament.
It's a wonderful presentation, Dustin. It takes me back to my childhood when I was growing up in the 60s. When these songs that he wrote, the protest songs that he wrote, were so real, and they're still so relevant. And that particular song, Blowing in the Wind, how many times must a man turn around and pretend that he cannot see? Is the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. The beautiful spot. And because of him, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War was on. So many things that, the hippie movement, the protest songs that were sung by others, by Pete Seeger, and then you have, what it is, Mary, those 3 people, I forget the name. So you have the song that says, "Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing." So these songs and Bob Dylan are so much associated. And I think that some of the great revolutionary thoughts, movements, ideas came from him. And we're very, very grateful to you for having brought this great poet and writer, composer, Nobel laureate to us today. On our first segment, Prasanna, we're very happy to have the kind of poems and poetry that have been presented this evening.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you for accepting this invitation and talking about Bob Dylan, highlighting his the ideas and views. Next would be Cheryl Jackson talking about Lucille Clifton.
Thank you so much. I wanted to
yes, welcome. You wanted to say something? Go ahead.
No, I thought he wanted me to go, so I'll just wait.
So we have Cheryl Jackson, who's a literary supernova and the first ranked best-selling Amazon author. Reared and raised in the South suburbs outside Chicago, Black literature influenced her writing, and Cheryl Jackson writes in the spirit of her past great literary ancestors. Previously published works: Sister Rock and Rhyme, Presence Poems in the Key of Life, mirrored images and different sides of the same coin. Her writings appear in multiple poetry anthologies, literary journals, and international global magazines. Today she speaks to us about Lucille Clifton, one of the most famous poems being Homage to My Hips. And I think that this is so important for us, especially as women all over the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you for a fine introduction. And I wanted to acknowledge Angie Williams. She's a poet, and she stopped by, and I invited her, and I just wanted to acknowledge that she's here today with us. So I just wanted to say hello, Angie. I am, as you just said, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite writers of all time, which is Lucille Clifton. Lucille Clifton was 73 years old, and she had a 45-year writing career. And that is wow. Langston Hughes actually introduced the world to Lucille Clifton. He took her writings to a publisher, and from there, she never stopped writing. She was an educator, she was a wife, a mother, a professor, very critically acclaimed, two-time oh my goodness. She had a lot of awards that she was awarded during that 45-year writing career. What was really fascinating to me is that Lucille Clifton was the first among some of the first poets to do a very, very unadorned, compact style of writing where she did not use capitalization. Everything was lowercase, and the writings were so compact and unadorned and just plainly spoken. I've often said that her works remind me as a Black woman of hugging your favorite aunt. They make you feel very comfortable. They're very comforting. And she just has a way of just speaking in a very down home, almost Mayberry sense kind of way. She's Southern. She grew up, she was born and raised in New York, but her home later became Maryland. She was a poet laureate of Maryland. So her writings had many themes. She spoke of the civil rights movement. She spoke of women. She spoke of women in a very feminist, and she was almost like a pioneer of Black feminism. She was very much before her time. What a lot of people didn't know about Lucille Clifton was she had 6 children. And so you think about her writing, and she often would joke that the reason her poems were so small and concise and compact was because she had to write them when her children were asleep. And so, if you have 6 children, you're playing beat the clock a lot of the time. So she would be writing at all times of nighttime. And I thought that was very interesting. I thought that was a very interesting part of her biography. She had an amazing sense of humor, going through racism, going through the civil rights movement, going through, quite frankly, patriarchy, and almost having to play second fiddle not only to men, but your man, your husband, having to play second fiddle in a field where Langston Hughes owned it, and he still owns it to this day. But quite frankly, she just, in my opinion, was just someone that wasn't as celebrated as maybe she could have been in her entire career. But I absolutely loved her. I was very lucky and fortunate to have a mom that not only was born in her birth year, but they shared the same birth month. So I feel very, very much spiritually attached to Lucille Clifton in so many great ways. And so that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to speak of her today, because her writing it's just transgenerational. You can read it to your grandmother, you can read it to your great grandmother, your aunt, you can read it to your sister. There's just not any part of African American life where her poems are not relevant. And so I'm going to share a few of her pieces with you guys today. And she was very joyful. So even though she had the fights of the Jim Crow and and the civil rights stuff, and being the second class citizen as a woman, her life was very joyful. And all 6 of her children spoke to how joyful she was as a human being. So I'm just going to be reading some of her pieces today. She had a poem that's called Sisters that she wrote. This is the first one I'm going to read for you guys. Me and you be sisters. We be the same. Me and you. Coming from the same place, me and you. Be greasing our legs, touching up our edges. Me and you. Be scared of rats. Be stepping on roaches. Me and you. Come running high down Purdy Street one time, and Mama laugh and shake her head at me and you. Me and you. Got baby. Got 35. Got black. Let our hair go back. Be loving ourselves. Be loving ourselves. Be sisters. Only where you sing, I, poet. The second piece I'm going to read is Homage to My Hips. And this one is one of my favorites of all time. Just to see her just kind of pay tribute to women and appreciate the shapes of women. I just love this poem. It goes like this. These hips are big hips. They need space to move around in. They don't fit into little petty places. These hips are free hips. They don't like to be held back. These hips have never been enslaved. They go where they want to go. They do what they want to do. These hips are mighty hips. These hips are magic hips. I have known them to put a spell on a man and spin him like a top. I love this poem, which is called Won't You Celebrate With Me? And this, again, goes back to speaking of Lucille, the joy, the zest and zeal that she had for living and family. This is one of her celebratory poems. Won't you celebrate with me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between sunshine and clay, my one hand holding tight, my other hand, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and failed. She loved history, and she often wrote of history. So I'm going to do her poem called Slave Ships. Slave ships loaded like spoons into the belly of Jesus, where we lay for weeks, for months, in the sweat and stink of our own breathing. Jesus, why do you not protect us? Chained to the heart of the angel, where the prayers we never tell, and hot and red is our bloody ankles. Jesus, angel, can these be men who vomit us out from ships called Jesus, angel, grace of God, onto a heathen country? Jesus, angel, ever again? Can these tongues speak? Can these bones walk? Grace of God, can this sin live? And the last one I'm going to do, it's a short, concise work, but I love the way Lucille spoke of everyday, ordinary things, which she spoke of them in a concise, compact way, but they often had a double meaning. And this is one of the poems where when you first read it, it sounds like, okay, she's a woman that she encounters, which is a homeless woman. But that's only on the surface level, because it's so much more than just being a homeless woman. So I'll kind of circle back on that after I read it. The name of the poem is called Miss Rosie. Miss Rosie, when I watch you wrapped up like garbage, sitting surrounded by the smell of 2 old potato peels, or when I watch you in your old man shoes with the little toe cut out, sitting, waiting for your mind, like next week's grocery. I say when I watch you, Miss Rose, you wet brown bag of a woman who used to be the best looking gal in Georgia, used to be called the Georgia Peach. I stand up through your destruction, Miss
तो
Rose.
बाबा यहाँ लाइट जला दो.
I stand up. That was the poem that I just read, where she really wasn't just talking about encountering a homeless woman. She was really speaking to the marginalization and just the smallness of how sometimes Black women are just left on the fringes of society. That was the bigger message of that poem. And that's why I love it so much. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's quite emotional when you talk about marginalized section of the people. Topali ma'am,
I can only thank Cheryl for the wonderful presentation. Sorry that we had a little power cut here, so but I heard you through, and race and gender is such an important role. The kind of poetry that you have read out, and although women's lives are very much alike, it's also very different. When you're a Black woman, we have to understand that we cannot club all women together, but some of the things that we do share. And her poems remind me of Maya Angelou's Still Rise, I should still I Rise, which is very inspirational. And when you mentioned that she has these many children and she writes these small poems, well, I think I don't have many children, but I do all the cooking in the house. And I have written a poem about how I cook between the sounds of the pressure cooker, because by the time one whistle goes on, so that's women's life too. And there's this very famous Nigerian woman novelist you must have read, I'm sure, or heard of her, Buchi Emecheta. And she would sit in her kitchen and do all her writing. She had to cook for her family. So we women writers have a different, take, but we have to understand that race plays a very important role, and the bitterness that sometimes we feel that the Black writer has it comes from the kind of suffering that perhaps it's not easy for just anybody to understand. If I say I'm a woman and I understand, I'm an Indian woman, I understand. No, it's not true. And we have to understand the depth of the agony, the angst, the suffering, the way the Black person is treated or seen, especially, when she writes about homage to my hips, how you look at her body, how a human body is looked at, especially a Black person's body, we are always being judged, so I think this is a wonderful presentation. This evening has been wonderful. We've listened to some great poets talking about some greater poets, and it's been so successful. It's been such a successful evening. And what you have done for us is that you have created a curiosity in us to read more, to read more about these poets. It's not enough in 15 minutes to know these poets, but to read more about it. Thank you so much. I thank all of you. And I'm sure, Prasanna, you have something to say.
Exactly. That's the main, but the purpose of that, I would definitely say it has it's fulfilled as like bringing closer to the people and erasing the borders of the world. So whatever it is, so we are the world and we are the people. Poets speak of poets. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Martina, thank you, Dustin, and thank you, Cheryl. And we also have honor of joining, as audience, Angie Williams and Raleigh and James. They're such a wonderful people who joined us, and he was been throughout the show. And they could not be part of this as a speakers, but in the this is once in a month program. So please look forward for our next announcement or who will be talking about in the September month. Of course, Rahul has already has given the name. So we'll look forward and so much exciting.
And Prasanna does a great job of promoting these programs. So you will be also heard, and we will hear about the poets that you've spoken of all over the world, which is very, very encouraging for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thanks.